As someone who runs a book-focused YouTube channel, I frequently encounter viewers who ask intriguing questions like, how can reading a book improve my life skills? Or, what book can make me more likable? Or, which book will drastically boost my cognitive skills? I used to dismiss these kinds of questions, cautioning my audience not to expect instant life changes from reading. I'd joke, what's next? A book called How to Be Smarter. Well, today I'm eating my words because I'm reviewing a book that's actually called Smart Thinking: 3 Essential Keys to Solve Problems, Innovate, and Get Things Done. I used to scoff at such a straightforward title, but after diving into the book, I realized it's worth sharing with you all. Finishing this book won't magically skyrocket your IQ, but if you embrace its systematic approach to thinking, grounded in science, logic, and innovation, you'll certainly become a wiser person. Agile thinking isn't the same as the critical thinking we've discussed in the past. There are titles like Critical Thinking, Tools for Taking Charge of Your Professional and Personal Life, and Think for Yourself, which are all about critical thinking. The focus there is on self-reflection and avoiding herd mentality or errors. Agile thinking, on the other hand, leans more towards creativity. It's about balancing critical analysis with ongoing creative thought, coming up with fresh solutions and making informed decisions. That's the real takeaway from this book. So, the book delves into 3 major areas: conceptual thinking, innovative thinking, and decision-making. While these may seem like straightforward topics, they're actually quite profound. First off, why aren't our brains naturally good at thinking? This is a wake-up call for everyone. Our minds aren't inherently designed for deep thought. In school, the focus is usually more on what to think rather than how to think. Tests also measure what we know, not how we think, leading to predetermined answers. From grade school to college, we're often presented with fixed scenarios and assumptions, implying that there's always a right answer, or at least a best one. But once we enter the professional world, we're confronted with a myriad of complex, uncertain issues. Here, the approach and methodology for problem-solving take precedence. For example, understanding Newton's thought process in mechanics is far more crucial than merely memorizing his equations. Philosopher Arthur Koestler once quipped, "The ultimate truth is penultimately always a falsehood." Why? Because our conclusions are often oversimplified and skewed towards certainty, while in reality it's the uncertainties that have a more profound impact on our lives. I was delighted to see that the author kicks off this book by citing another favorite of mine, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. The author of that book shares an intriguing metaphor. He observed people in South Asia catching monkeys in a unique way. They'd place a jar with a narrow opening and fill it with corn, a favorite snack for monkeys. The monkeys would then stick their hands into the jar to grab the corn. However, what happens is that the monkey's hand fits perfectly when it goes in, but once it grabs a handful of corn, it can't pull its hand back out. The monkey ends up trapped by the jar, making it easy for people to catch it. Even though the monkey could simply let go, it refuses to release the corn, choosing instead to be captured rather than let go of its prize. So, what's the takeaway from this metaphor? It highlights that the real challenge isn't coming up with new ideas, it's letting go of old, ingrained beliefs. The primary reason we struggle with innovation or openness to new perspectives isn't a lack of intelligence. It's because our minds are cluttered with outdated conventions and frameworks that resist change. So, it's no surprise that individuals who introduce new ideas often face public backlash and may even risk being burned at the stake. That's the harsh reality. Our brains evolved not for the pursuit of truth, but for survival. They're designed to conserve energy and enable quick reactions. In life-threatening situations like flash floods, tiger attacks, or fires, our instinctual responses serve us well, often guiding us to safety. However, when it comes to grappling with complex issues like ethics, philosophy, or logic, our brains hit a wall. That's why many people default to blind obedience and credulity in their daily lives. These approaches save mental energy, eliminating the need for deep, strenuous thought. Intuition may not be capable of deep thought, but it can be a lifesaver. Imagine you're walking on a glacier and suddenly notice a crack in the ice. Your immediate response would be to run, relying solely on instinct, which is often accurate in such life or death situations. However, when it comes to cognitive thinking, our brains are riddled with biases and fallacies. You can get a better understanding of these by listening to our discussion on thinking fast and slow. Take the narrative fallacy, for example. This occurs when our recollection of past events doesn't align with what actually happened. Questions like, how was your college experience? How successful was your first job? What did your boss think of you? Or, how are your relationships with others? Often elicit answers that are more a product of our imagination than reality. This is what's known as the narrative fallacy. The narrative fallacy teaches us that the notions of predictability and control are often illusory. When we reflect on our personal history, or even the broader scope of human history, we tend to seek patterns, believing that one event led to another in a clear cause and effect chain. However, this perceived linkage is often a mirage, a byproduct of the narrative fallacies our brains construct. As a result, our day-to-day decision-making often relies on simplified heuristics. What does that mean? In layman's terms, biases and anchoring are forms of these heuristics. We often label people based on various factors: their skin color, the region they come from, or the profession they're in, assuming these factors dictate how they will behave. Why do we have a tendency to label people and harbor various biases? The simple answer lies in simplified heuristics. This means we don't have to engage in deep thought. We can just steer clear of certain people in the future. This mindset fills our lives with biases and the anchoring effect, all under the umbrella of simplified heuristics. So it's easy to see how our brains are so readily influenced and manipulated by external factors. Aldous Huxley once made an insightful comment saying, "Most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted." Often, we believe we're engaged in thoughtful contemplation. You might sit there pondering deeply for an entire afternoon, only to realize you've merely been reshuffling your existing biases. The truth is, few people genuinely understand the art of thinking, and even fewer are willing to take the time to sit down, do nothing, and engage in meaningful thought. The book discusses a psychological experiment where experts had volunteers sit in chairs with their hands tied, preventing them from doing anything else. They were given an electric shock switch that they could use on themselves. They had two options for 15 minutes. Either press the switch to shock themselves or simply sit there. What were the findings? Most participants chose to shock themselves multiple times. One individual even shocked himself over 190 times, repeatedly pressing the button. It turns out that when left with nothing to do, people would rather administer electric shocks to themselves than sit quietly for just 15 minutes. Give it a try. Can you sit still for 15 minutes without any thoughts? It's a challenging task, indicating that people aren't as keen on deep thinking as we might assume. We also need to clarify that thinking is not the same as reasoning. You might say, I can solve complex geometry problems. Doesn't that mean I can think? Solving geometry problems or reasoning like Sherlock Holmes is not thinking. It's merely logical reasoning. This distinction is highlighted by a famous quote from Niels Bohr, who said, "You haven't thought, you've just been logical." In essence, thinking involves going beyond known facts to make new discoveries, not just logically piecing things together, which is reasoning. While reasoning is a component and a tool of thinking, it doesn't encapsulate the full scope of what thinking is. So, what does agile thinking entail? At its core, it involves two key elements: metacognition and counterintuitive thinking. If you're a regular listener to our book discussions, you're likely familiar with the term metacognition. Books like The Great Knowledge Migration and How People Learn also delve into this concept. What is metacognition? It's the understanding of one's own cognitive processes. For example, if you accept what someone says, have you ever questioned why you accepted it? How did you come to accept it? Is your process of acceptance scientifically sound? Have you ever reflected on why you trust the logic behind what was said? This level of introspection about your thinking process is what we call metacognition. However, most people in our daily lives won't put in the effort to engage in this level of introspection. We often make snap judgments. Either we believe or we don't. Either we accept or we reject, making choices and conclusions on a whim. That's why the first skill we need to master is metacognition, to critically examine whether our thought processes and methods are scientifically sound. We can't just rely on gut feelings or make snap judgments. We need to learn how to make nuanced decisions. Often, we oversimplify our opinions into binary terms like "I'm against it" or "I support it." But real-life issues are rarely that straightforward. A complex issue can't be boiled down to just being for or against it. It requires a thorough analysis. Counterintuitive thinking means we need to clarify, integrate, and then create new concepts. To do this, the author suggests that we need both skepticism and naivety. What does naivety mean? A person who isn't naive won't question widely accepted beliefs. For instance, the common saying, "You should take your job seriously and work hard," goes unquestioned if you're not naive, because that's the way we've all been raised to think. However, if you're a naive individual, you'd pose questions like, why is hard work a must? Could I perform better without pushing myself so hard? If I can excel without the grind, then why grind at all? These are the kinds of questions a naive person would ponder, challenging the societal norms we often take for granted. The second key point is relentless dedication. If you're not willing to immerse yourself in complex problems like Newton did, pacing the halls of Cambridge day in and day out, you can't expect to achieve groundbreaking results. The third element is audacity, challenging established norms and questioning the wisdom of those who came before you can not only lead to public scorn, but may even put your life at risk. Finally, we delve into the realm of conceptual thinking. This is the most eye-opening section of the book for me. The reason some people stand out as smarter, more contributive, and more effective than others lies in their ability to engage in conceptual thinking. What does conceptual thinking mean? It signifies that groundbreaking innovations often stem from new ideas formulated by scientists. Take Newton, for example. He observed that apples fall to earth, as do cannonballs and anything else thrown into the air. Unwilling to accept Aristotle's prior explanation that this was simply the nature of matter, Newton pondered a universal principle at play. He then introduced the revolutionary concept of gravity, reshaping our understanding of the physical world and giving rise to the notion of a mechanical universe. In daily life, The power of a concept is immense. Once a robust concept is coined, it can endure for an extended period. Conceptual thinking is a critical cognitive approach that clarifies and deepens our understanding while increasing our influence over others. It's defined as a unique form of questioning that involves self-reflection on how we employ common terms. If traditional vocabulary falls short in addressing current issues, it's time to invent a new concept. Conceptual thinking involves transcending everyday language, scrutinizing words as if they were new, and naively questioning the concepts we employ. Rather than making assumptions, we should evaluate and then accept, engaging in metacognition, thinking about our thinking. This requires us to analyze, integrate, and simultaneously invent new concepts. I've noticed that during the entrepreneurial journey, the power of conceptual thinking comes into play, giving birth to entirely new sectors. Take, for instance, the initial market offering of local organic foods, which were superior in quality to other available products. This idea struggled to gain traction until someone coined the term farm to table. This new concept not only clarified the initiative, but also led to widespread support for it. It wasn't just an odd endeavor by an individual, it was the birth of a new industry known as farm to table. Therefore, the influence of conceptual thinking on people is profound. Having a concept allows the mind to think more straightforwardly and opens the door for various research topics. This is particularly true in academic settings, such as when writing master's or doctoral theses, where the invention of new, more nuanced concepts is often required. So, how do we go about inventing new concepts? Philosopher Bertrand Russell once made a crucial point. The awareness of universals is called conception, and a universal of which we are aware is called a concept. Take Newton's observations of falling apples and cannonballs as an example. This was the initial stage of forming a concept. Once he developed the idea of gravity, he realized its universal applicability, meaning, when he extended the concept of gravity to various facets of life, down to atoms, molecules, and even electrons, and it still held true, the concept was fully validated. The process entails gathering and organizing information, followed by interpretation and evaluation, and then injecting our own creativity into it. When we're in the phase of conceptualizing, immense creativity is required, and ultimately, we need to forecast the impact this new concept will have. For instance, you've likely encountered financial advisors and insurance consultants. Insurance consultants, being experts in their field, guide you in making informed decisions about which insurance policies are best suited for you. Here are 4 steps for conceptualizing an idea. The first step involves listing all the observable facts, much like Newton did when he observed various phenomena. The second step is to draw inferences and establish connections between these facts. The third step is to hypothesize or create a new concept. And the fourth step is to test this concept. While it may sound straightforward, achieving a genuine breakthrough is far from easy. You might want to try some exercises on your own. Think about some phenomena you've observed for a while but couldn't articulate clearly. Now, you can attempt to name them using this approach to conceptual thinking. So how do we dissect concepts? First off, it's vital to recognize that our understanding of concepts dictates how we react to various situations. Consider the iconic line from the movie The Godfather, when Michael Corleone tells his consigliere, Tom Hagen, "I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse." Most people would just nod in agreement and say, "Sounds good, can't wait." But Tom Hagen digs deeper. He asks, What exactly do you mean by an offer he can't refuse? Can you define that? This probing approach is a hallmark of conceptual thinking. While the phrase, an offer he can't refuse, might seem self-explanatory, Tom Hagen seeks a clearer understanding. He even goes on to say, an offer he can't refuse is, well, an offer he can't refuse. Yet, Michael insists on a precise definition, emphasizing that our grasp of concepts molds our way of thinking. Additionally, without a thorough examination of each concept, you'll miss out on chances for innovation. Take the idea of offering excellent customer service, for instance. If this is merely a catchphrase plastered on the office wall, it loses its impact. But if someone steps forward and challenges the team to define what excellent really means, then the quality of the service we provide has a real shot at improving. This goes back to the need for a certain level of naivety, recognizing that many terms we use are vaguely defined, leading to a lackluster and hazy outcome. Concepts can be categorized into two types, static and dynamic. Static concepts like cup, table, book, and watch don't change over time. Once defined, they stay the same. On the other hand, numerous concepts are ever-changing, such as dedication, attention to detail, craftsmanship, and empathy. These terms evolve and expand as society changes. So, if we treat every concept as if it's static, we're essentially closing off our minds to creative possibilities. To truly grasp a concept, there are a few steps to follow. First, gather representative examples. For instance, if you're told about excellent customer service, collect instances that exemplify this term. This is your starting point. Next, dissect these examples. What is the essence of each example? What commonalities do they share? Identifying these shared traits will help you understand what excellent customer service really means. Lastly, validate your understanding of the concept. If you've boiled down excellent customer service to making the customer feel at ease while receiving non-intrusive service, it's not about how long you smile or how many teeth you show, nor is it about asking for a rating. These are fundamentally different interpretations. So, once you've clarified a concept, it's crucial to test your understanding to see if it holds up under different circumstances. So, how do we synthesize concepts and ideas? There are 4 distinct approaches. Firstly, you can create entirely new concepts. Secondly, you can refine existing thought patterns. This involves enriching a concept. Take movies as an example. As the genre diversifies, someone might introduce a subcategory like road movies, which focus on stories set on highways. This is the second way to integrate ideas. Thirdly, you can build upon existing concepts. Let's say you're into historical research. Many scholars focus on iconic figures like Maximilien Robespierre, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, or Napoleon Bonaparte. If you find that these figures have been extensively studied, leaving little room for fresh perspectives, you might look more closely at what else was happening during their times. You may discover an overlooked force, the general public. In the narratives of these historical figures, the role of the public is often significant yet underexplored. This observation could lead to a new concept like the role of the masses in history, opening up a new avenue for historical research. This approach is about reassembling ideas based on existing concepts to find new insights. The fourth approach involves merging 2 or more existing concepts. By doing so, you might stumble upon a groundbreaking idea. For instance, in leadership courses, we often discuss why employees leave a company. In examining this issue, 2 key concepts come into play. The first is employee contribution, which gauges the skills and value an employee brings to the table. The second is employee risk, which assesses the likelihood of the employee leaving the organization. When you blend these two concepts, you arrive at a novel framework. Employees can now be segmented into 4 categories: high risk, high contribution, high risk, low contribution, low risk, low contribution, and low risk, high contribution. This multifaceted perspective allows for a more nuanced understanding of your workforce. You're not just evaluating employees based on 2 isolated factors, but considering a composite of their risk and contribution levels. This nuanced view can guide you in deciding which employees should be prioritized for retention. So how does mastering the art of conceptual thinking benefit us? According to the author, one immediate advantage is achieving higher grades on essays. Even if you're not currently engaged in essay writing, this skill is invaluable for those involved in research. The book cites an example from the University of London, emphasizing that examiners are keenly interested in your ability to think conceptually. They want to see if you can pinpoint the core issue, articulate its importance clearly, and lay out a coherent strategy for resolution. Essentially, you're expected to present a well-structured argument that directly tackles the problem at hand. The University of London suggests that top-scoring students excel in noticing intricate details, identifying potential disagreements, and delving into them. In contrast, students with mediocre grades often take a lax approach, focusing only on the obvious aspects and accepting problem conditions without scrutiny. If you approach issues in a cursory manner, you're unlikely to excel in research. So, the first perk of mastering conceptual thinking is enhancing your research skills. Moreover, this knack for original thinking can lead you to more engaging research topics and infuse creativity into your work. Your prowess in conceptual thinking isn't just beneficial for academics, writing, and research. It's also crucial in the business world. Even in family life, conceptual thinking plays a role. For instance, when playing with your kids, creating new concepts can lead to a unique bond. Your child will find these family-specific definitions or games intriguing and enjoyable. In essence, honing your conceptual thinking skills is the first step toward becoming more intellectually agile. Next up is the concept of innovative thinking. The book outlines 10 essential traits commonly found in innovative thinkers. Firstly, the ability to clear one's mind is crucial. Take John Nash, for example, who would often wander alone, engrossed in deep thought. This level of focus requires solitude. Secondly, the willingness to devise solutions rather than merely searching for them sets you apart. Einstein, for instance, was more interested in crafting his own solutions than in borrowing from past scholars. Thirdly, the power of simple thinking can't be underestimated. Socrates emphasized the importance of acknowledging one's ignorance as a starting point for asking simple yet profound questions. He famously said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing, and the unexamined life is not worth living." Lastly, the knack for identifying problems where others see none is invaluable. Dr. Ignaz Philipp Semmelweis of Vienna Hospital is a case in point. He discovered that mothers delivered by doctors had a significantly higher mortality rate compared to those attended by nurses or those who gave birth at home. At the time, doctors didn't see the significance of Semmelweis's observation and dismissed it. However, Semmelweis noticed that doctors were delivering babies without washing their hands after performing autopsies. This led him to advocate for hand washing as a standard practice. Fifth, the willingness to explore causes, effects, and potential solutions is crucial. Take Galileo, for example. Despite limited resources, He constructed various inclined planes to conduct his experiments. He challenged the prevailing notion that an object in constant motion would eventually stop, proving instead that it was external resistance that halted its movement. Sixth, openness to new ideas is vital. Immanuel Kant, upon reading David Hume's works, found them to be radically different from his previous education. Instead of dismissing these new ideas, he embraced them and went on to develop his own philosophical theories. Seventh, the ability to question one's own judgments is important. Being open to reconsideration and willing to adapt your views is a sign of intellectual agility. Some great minds lose this ability as they age, which is a loss of the agile thinking we're discussing. So, whether it's about creating new concepts or fostering innovative thinking, the cornerstone is common sense. However, common sense is often overlooked because our brains are more inclined to accept illusions and biases rather than face reality. For instance, Napoleon was open to feedback in his early years, but in his later years, he ignored warnings about invading Russia, showcasing a loss of critical thinking. The eighth characteristic is being both steadfast and ingenious, much like Newton, who dedicated his life to researching a single subject. The ninth is the courage to stand out. Steve Jobs' famous slogan, "Think different," encapsulates this idea. The 10th is optimism. When Edison was questioned about his numerous failures while inventing the light bulb, he reframed it as finding multiple ways that didn't work, emphasizing the importance of a positive outlook. Pessimists may avoid mistakes, but they also avoid progress. Optimists, on the other hand, learn from their mistakes and continue to move forward. These are the 10 traits that define great innovators, and it's crucial to keep them in mind. So, how do you come up with an idea? The key is to ask questions, lots of them. Make these questions as clear and specific as you can. Then, gather new and intriguing questions to add to your list. Finally, delve deep into these questions, examining them from various angles, such as personal, material, and societal perspectives. By doing so, you'll arrive at a multitude of unique insights. For instance, consider the issue of climate change. It's a topic that affects everyone, our living conditions, and even the technology that powers our industries. If we don't manage carbon emissions, the future of our society is at stake. The subject is so vast that you can approach it from multiple angles, each offering numerous opportunities for innovation and thoughtful discussion. So, how do you go about organizing your ideas? The first piece of advice is to be wary of your ingrained thought patterns or habitual thinking. Consider the amusing story of a scientist who didn't want to overthink a simple issue. He had a cat that frequently needed to go outside, requiring someone to open the door each time. To solve this, the scientist cut a hole in the floor for the cat to use. When a new kitten arrived, he impulsively cut a smaller hole next to the first one. When questioned, he explained that the big cat would use the big hole and the small cat the small one. This is a classic example of falling into the trap of habitual thinking. He assumed each cat needed its own exit, which is quite absurd when you think about it. Why not just have one hole that serves both? In our daily lives, we often find ourselves stuck in similar patterns of habitual thinking. More often than not, we opt for the path of least resistance, preferring to tackle issues with existing solutions rather than seeking innovative approaches. So, before we can brainstorm new ideas, it's crucial to dissect the issue and identify the cause and effect relationships, which is often easier said than done. Firstly, make a comprehensive list. Jot down everything that's relevant to the problem you're tackling. Secondly, uncover the layers. Understand the various dimensions of the issue and how each corresponds to different elements in the cause and effect chain. Thirdly, engage in verification and elimination processes. Lastly, identify similarities and differences. Let me delve a bit deeper into this last point about similarities and differences. Take the example of Semmelweis, who discovered varying mortality rates among new mothers. He first identified points of difference. He noticed that outcomes varied depending on whether the birth took place at home or in a hospital, whether a doctor or a midwife was involved, and even among different doctors. These are what we call points of divergence. So, what are the commonalities? The hospital serves as a teaching institution. Doctors often examine the mothers, and those examined by doctors have a high rate of fever and death. The longer the labor, the more likely the mother is to develop a fever, as longer labor increases the chances of being examined. Most of these examinations are conducted by Semmelweis and his interns, and the death rate drops when they are not present. The death rate increased when Professor Klein, who prefers hands-on teaching, replaced Professor Buer, who used mannequins for instruction. After thorough observation, Semmelweis identified both diverging and converging factors in the maternal mortality rates. The key is to control the variables as much as possible, changing only one at a time to uncover the underlying pattern. Ultimately, all signs pointed to one conclusion. If a doctor enjoys hands-on examinations and also conducts autopsies, the maternal death rate rises. This was because doctors back then didn't wash their hands after autopsies, unaware of the invisible bacteria they were carrying, thus increasing the death rate. After this rigorous analysis, and particularly after witnessing a colleague die from an infection caused by a cut during an autopsy, Semmelweis became convinced that something invisible on the corpses was causing the fevers and deaths. He decided to share this groundbreaking discovery with his medical colleagues. However, his findings were met with unanimous opposition from the medical community at the time. They accused him of tarnishing the profession and insulting doctors, ultimately labeling him a pariah and a traitor. He was dismissed from his job and declared insane, meeting a tragic end in a mental institution. So, when you're diving into creative thinking, it's essential to pinpoint the cause and effect relationships to draw meaningful conclusions. One tool that can help us make sense of these intricate issues is the use of analogies. Analogies can be incredibly helpful in problem solving. For instance, Einstein's theory of relativity employed a fascinating analogy to explain a concept that was hard for people to grasp. People were accustomed to Newton's theory of gravity, but Einstein introduced a different perspective, saying it wasn't gravity at all. So, why does Earth orbit the Sun? Einstein used a brilliant analogy involving a bowling ball pressed onto a spring mattress. He explained that the heavy bowling ball distorts the space around it, causing other smaller objects to orbit it. This was his way of explaining the warping of space-time. This is the power of analogy. Whether we're describing light as particles or waves, these are forms of analogical reasoning that help frame our understanding of complex issues. However, we should also be wary of misleading analogies. Often, analogies can lead to what's known as false generalizations. These occur when two things appear similar and may even share some characteristics, but we can't hastily turn these resemblances into definitive conclusions. The book cites a compelling example. After the 2008 financial meltdown, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke swiftly decided to bail out the banks. This decision was met with public outrage. People felt that these greedy bankers had created risky financial products, putting the entire economy on the brink of collapse. Yet, the Federal Reserve was using taxpayer money to save these affluent bankers. Bernanke defended his decision on TV, likening the situation to a reckless neighbor who smokes in bed and sets his house on fire. Ignoring him, Bernanke argued, would result in the entire neighborhood going up in flames. The immediate priority, he said, was to put out the fire and save the community, thereby stabilizing the economy. Did this analogy win people over? According to Bernanke, the urgency to save. The banks seemed justified to prevent a broader economic disaster. However, this analogy sparked debates online. Critics pointed out that the bank isn't like a neighbor in a residential community, but more like a castle on a hill overseeing the entire city. If it were to burn down, they argued, it would merely clear a piece of land, freeing the city from the shadow of this debt-inducing fortress. In essence, people felt that the bank wasn't a neighbor in need, but a distant, towering entity. Some people argue that it's not about putting out fires. Instead, they claim that the government is seizing unburned houses, evicting the owners, and then giving the property to the very people who started the fires. In this view, the government isn't acting as a firefighter at all. Bernanke's analogy, they say, is misleading and serves only to absolve him of responsibility while depleting significant resources. The debate over the validity of this analogy continues. Analogies can be powerful tools for understanding complex issues, but they must be chosen carefully. Finding the right analogy, like Einstein's groundbreaking concept of quantum mechanics or his analogy of a bowling ball warping a spring mattress to explain space-time, requires deep research and a high degree of similarity to be effective. Moving forward, another approach to problem-solving involves breaking free from our established thought patterns. When we can identify and adopt new mental models, we open the door to innovative ideas. Take soccer, for example. The debate over whether to use electronic referees touches on the game's purity and the role of technology. If we only consider preserving the game's traditional essence, we risk turning it into a relic rather than allowing it to evolve. But imagine if we could push the boundaries even further, challenging the conventional wisdom that soccer is just a human-to-human sport. What if we could create an enhanced version of the game? Picture a player wearing advanced electronic gear that allows for faster gameplay and more powerful kicks, sending the ball soaring like a missile. On the other side, the goalkeeper could be in an armored vehicle, defending the goal. This could give rise to an entirely new, adrenaline-pumping form of the sport, akin to the futuristic games depicted in movies like Alita: Battle Angel. By embracing this kind of innovative thinking, we open up a world of potential research opportunities and significantly boost our career prospects. According to the author, these are precisely the skills that employers are clamoring for: conceptual and innovative thinking, the ability to use analogies to make complex ideas understandable, and the knack for reassembling concepts in novel ways to find underlying patterns and cause and effect. Relationships. Individuals with these capabilities are the talent that employers are most eager to bring on board. After you've honed your skills in conceptual and creative thinking, the next step is to become adept at making smart decisions. There are generally three kinds of decision makers. First, there's the autocrat, who simply declares, "The discussion is over, I've made up my mind," effectively shutting down any debate. Second, you have the waffler, who can't seem to make a decision to save their life. They'll agonize over a menu for ages, paralyzed by too many choices. Lastly, there's the non-decider, which breaks down into two subtypes. One is the fatalist, who, if you were to consult a guru for advice, would tell you, "Don't bother choosing, it's all predestined." This person believes that fate has already made all the decisions, so why bother making a choice? The other subtype is the filter, who has a built-in mechanism for ignoring information that doesn't align with their decisions. For instance, if they've chosen to buy a particular car, they'll stop looking at ads for other cars, even if those cars might offer better features or deals. They've made their choice, and they'll stick to it, filtering out any conflicting information. This person is also a kind of non-decider. So, how do you go about making decisions? First off, aim to base your choices on as complete and accurate information as possible. But remember, you can only do your best to gather all the facts. Waiting for perfect information will leave you stuck in indecision, as perfect information simply doesn't exist. Next, be grounded in reality. While many claim to be realistic, it's crucial to dig deeper into what that really means. Being realistic involves the courage to confront ideas or facts that challenge your own beliefs, the humility to admit when you might be wrong, and the openness to accept outcomes that differ from your expectations. Another key aspect is effective goal attainment. A good decision isn't just about reaching your goal, it's about reaching it in the most effective way possible. Lastly, learn to accept the outcomes of your decisions. No decision is perfect, and every choice you make is essentially an exercise in managing imperfections. While it's okay to reflect on your decisions, dwelling on them won't do you any good. Learn from them, but don't get stuck in a loop of regret. So, how do you assess the effectiveness of solutions? One approach is to use practical metrics like cost-benefit analysis. You weigh the costs against the benefits and consider the annualized rate of return to determine if the numbers make sense. Beyond just crunching numbers, it's essential to anticipate how others will react to your decisions. Your choices don't exist in a vacuum. They have a domino effect that can influence others, who in turn can affect you. This is where game theory comes into play. The book Game Theory and Life offers various models to consider, especially when you're navigating both competitive and cooperative relationships. The decisions you make will have different implications depending on whether you're dealing with allies, competitors, or those who are a bit of both. The essence of game theory is trust. Trust can significantly lower the costs of these strategic interactions. If you treat every interaction as a one-off, you're less likely to care about your long-term reputation. But if you recognize that life is long and filled with ongoing interactions, you'll place greater value on maintaining a good reputation. Focusing on reputation is the most advantageous strategy for long-term interactions. So, what's the most challenging part? It's making decisions when things are uncertain. In college, we took a course on decision theory, but in hindsight, I've never actually applied those methods in my professional life. The course taught us to draw decision trees and calculate probabilities for each branch, ensuring they all added up to 100%. It was essentially probability theory 2.0. However, I've never used these decision-making methods in my career. The problem is that these decision trees, as complex as they were, still operated on the premise of certainty. They provided probabilities, costs, and benefits for each scenario, which you could easily calculate. But life doesn't work that way. There's too much uncertainty to rely solely on mathematical models for decision-making. This is highlighted in two seminal books, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which discusses irrationality, and The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which delves into the concept of uncertainty. Given this backdrop of irrationality and unpredictability, probability tools can only serve as a guide. The book also discusses various probability tools, like Bayesian theorem, which should be accessible if you have a basic understanding of math. But the author emphasizes that these tools should only serve as a guide. For instance, you might have a team of advisors to help you make rough calculations. However, it's crucial to remember that these models don't represent the real world, where unforeseen events can throw off your entire plan. So, how should we make decisions in such unpredictable circumstances? First, identify the criteria or features that are important for your decision. For example, if you're in the market for a new home, factors like location, school districts, transportation, amenities, and even the quality of neighbors will come into play. Next, weigh the importance of these criteria. You might assign a percentage to each based on how crucial it is to your decision. Then comes the scoring phase. Evaluate each home based on these weighted criteria. This is often referred to as the expert scoring method. You assign scores based on the weight of each criterion and then tally them up to get a final score for each property. Finally, reflect on your decision. After you've made your purchase, take some time to assess what worked and what didn't. This reflection will help you make better decisions in the future, should you find yourself in the market for another home. It's all part of a continuous process of improvement in decision-making. Of course, as we've previously noted, being open to acceptance is key. Even if you're able to make decisions based on scientific reasoning, you must still be prepared for unforeseen black swan events and the unpredictable elements that irrationality can introduce. These are the core tools outlined in the book we're discussing. It's divided into 3 main sections: conceptual thinking, creative thinking, and methods for making decisions. What sets educated people apart from those who are not? If you studied biology in college, you might only remember basic terms like cell walls, cytoplasm, and nuclei, along with various taxonomic categories. Given that our retention of knowledge is so limited after graduation, why do we still value long-term education? As B.F. Skinner aptly put it, education is what remains after one has forgotten what one has learned. Today, we've explored 3 key areas: deep thinking through conceptual creation and analysis, in-depth reasoning through establishing cause and effect relationships and fostering innovative ideas, and making rational decisions. These are all tools that can shape our way of thinking, even if we forget the actual knowledge we've acquired. Learning to make rational decisions signifies the beginning of independent thinking, which is the core message of the book we're discussing. Titles like Think for Yourself and Critical Thinking aim to equip us with the skills to think critically and independently, rather than simply going along with popular opinion or acting on impulse. A society filled with independent thinkers is more likely to be mature and stable. While it's natural to trust your own judgments and beliefs, it's equally important to remain open to self-reflection and new perspectives. There are no ultimate truths or unchangeable beliefs. Our understanding of the world is always in flux. The tools we've discussed are merely stepping stones on our journey of continuous improvement. Staying open and reflective is our safeguard for becoming increasingly intelligent, so I hope we can all strive to be smarter individuals.